what I'm doing is pointing out all the imbalances, whether it's with the hormones, whether it's with what we see with liver function or what we see in gut function, whether it's the microbiome or pathogens or just all of these inflammation markers. These are healing opportunities. These are the things that we need to do to feel better in our bodies. And many times, I know you probably experienced this too, when people come to you because they're concerned about osteoporosis, or people come to me about, my hormones are a mess, and I talk about stool testing. They're like, why? It's, all of these tests that we do, you want to look at the big picture and look at as many areas of healing opportunity as possible. And since I do believe all disease begins in the gut, and again, hormones drive everything in the body, you need to work on those two things together, in my opinion, to restore balance in the body.
Today's guest is Paula Reed. Paula is the founder of Paula Reed Wellness and co-founder of Functional Health Alliance with her colleague and clinical advisor, Whitney Morgan. With a focus on balancing hormones and restoring gut health, she helps perimenopausal women and men get off the hormone roller coaster and age with vibrant health. Paula has helped hundreds of clients, patients, and her private clients and an integrative medical practice where she was the wellness provider for over 5 years. In addition to being a certified functional diagnostic practitioner, she is board certified in functional wellness, holistic health, and functional health coaching. In addition to her private practice, Paula serves as clinical advisor to functional diagnostic nutrition and helps many practitioners help heal their clients. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you.
Explain to us how you became a functional diagnostic practitioner. What is it that led you to this path?
Good question. I really started with health coaching originally and going back to school to learn about nutrition. And that was primarily originally because of some issues actually within my own family, especially my son, but also some issues that I had been having, that I was going to doctor after doctor after doctor and just not getting resolution. I was handed prescription medications, told that I just needed an antidepressant, or I needed a medication for IBS, or I didn't really have any issues with my hormones or my thyroid. I was just getting older, and it was just something that I should expect because of my age, which I thought was really ridiculous considering I think I was 38 years old when I was told that. And I just thought
Wow.
that was, yeah, absolutely ridiculous. So I originally started studying nutrition and trying to figure out, okay, what are just the easy things, nutrition, easy things that I can do to make myself feel better, to take better care of my health. And then, I just wanted to dig deeper and deeper. I'm kind of a data nerd, so I started looking into things like functional medicine labs, things that went beyond conventional medicine, because I feel like I want to be careful here. I don't want to say that there isn't a place for conventional medicine, for example. There is certainly a place for that. It can be life-saving. But I also feel like sometimes we don't dig deep enough in conventional medicine. So I had a wonderful opportunity to work at an integrative medical practice in Dayton, Ohio, when I was still living in Ohio. I learned alongside medical doctors, nurse practitioners, went through a couple more certification programs, and I became the wellness provider there. So I learned functional medicine labs, how to look for root cause, and how to address those things from a holistic standpoint. Diet, exercise, sleep, stress reduction, and sometimes supplements. So that's kind of how I started with that. It started with nutrition and health coaching, and then evolved into functional medicine labs because I realized that sometimes we're just guessing if we're not testing, and it just helps to have some guidance so you know exactly where to begin and what to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. And when did you find FDN?
So, interestingly enough, after working at that integrative medical practice for 5 years and learning a lot from my mentors there, I decided I wanted to work from home again. My husband and I were exploring the possibility of potentially spending some time outside of Ohio, especially in the winter. Anyone who's from Ohio knows it gets pretty cold and pretty gray. So we had this dream to at least spend part of the time of the year in Arizona, which is where I am right now. Ironically, a little cold today, but normally it's really nice in the winter. So I decided to leave the practice so I could work from home. But honestly, I became kind of spoiled working at the practice and being able to order functional medicine labs and work with patients that way in a one-on-one manner. And I did some groups there too. But I wanted to continue with functional medicine labs. And I somehow got on a mailing list with functional diagnostic nutrition. I don't even remember how exactly that happened. But after about 4 or 5 months, maybe, of receiving those emails, I thought, I'm going to explore this possibility. And when I looked at what the program involved, everything that was taught, I thought, well, some of this, like I already know, but I knew that it would give me the ability to order functional medicine labs and work with my clients in the way that I had been doing when I was working in the medical practice. So that's what got me started there.
When was this? Like what year?
Believe it or not, it was 2019, so it wasn't all that long ago. It took me about 8 months, I guess, to go through the certification program because right after I started it is when the big pandemic happened and everything kind of got a little chaotic. But just worked through that and graduated the program in early 2020, I guess. Yeah, 2020. And then I, practiced for about a year as an FDN, doing what I already knew to do. And then I was asked to become a clinical advisor a year later because of my previous experience in working with functional medicine labs and working with so many people. So I've been doing that since June of 21.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I don't know, I didn't know that about you, but now I know where that knowledge came from. I found FDN in 2014 when I was in perimenopause, walking through quicksand. I felt like I was walking through
Oh,
quicksand. And for those that are listening that want to understand what FDN is, Functional Diagnostic Nutrition is the name of the company. And Reed Davis, the founder, what he teaches is how to run and interpret functional labs. And
hmm,
one of the things he says over and over is you don't test, guess. And
yes.
in Reed's experience, he noticed that when he ran functional labs and he uncovered root causes of illness, that when he was able to get it at the root cause, that his patients were or his clients were able to heal. So
Hmm,
that is what we're speaking about. And when I first went there, I didn't have the background that you have. So I always was naturally minded, and to be able to
hmm,
run these labs, like to run a stool lab and to find out that you have a bacterial overgrowth that's affecting your
yeah.
digestion, or to run a hormone lab and to see where you have issues, like it's
Hmm.
really really amazing to get, to be able to look in at your function, a function of your body.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I also appreciated from the actual FDN training, which, just to be perfectly honest, I hadn't really experienced even working in an integrative medical practice, was the need to not just piecemeal things either, but to look at the big picture and to explore as many healing opportunities as possible and not just zoom in on one area because sometimes symptoms that we're having or ways that we're feeling, we think it's coming from this place when it may actually be a combination of things. So I liked learning that in FDN. That wasn't really something that was necessarily focused on so much in the practice. It really was just a little bit more piecemeal. So I do appreciate this approach a lot better.
Yeah, and so Reed's program Dress, we look at
Hmm.
diet, we look at rest, which is sleep and deep restorative
Yeah.
sleep, or resting the body,
Hmm.
exercise, stress management, and supplementation. And
Right.
when it's a holistic or a total approach to health. And so, yeah, I find that you constantly go back to that. And when you're working with
Right.
clients at different times, we're always going back to, let's look at the diet, let's look at this. And you've got
Hmm.
the interpretation of the functional labs, but then you're always going back to, now what's going on with nutrition, and are you sleeping well, and are you resting, are you moving your body, because you need to be doing everything. And so yeah, that's great. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about your favorite labs to run and your
Okay.
expertise. So I always see you posting, and I've had many conversations with you. I feel like hormones and gut are
Hmm.
really strong, such a strong skill set of yours. So I'd love for you to explain some information about the labs that we run and what
Hmm.
we uncover, and how that actually gives us this tremendous opportunity to help people heal in the way that we're able to.
Okay. Awesome. So I truly believe that when it comes to our health, hormones drive everything in the body. And I'm not just talking about the sex hormones, although that is a huge portion of it, but also like our thyroid and insulin, which is a hormone. So hormones drive everything in the body, and all disease begins in the gut. Anyone who's in the natural health space has probably heard that particular quote, and I believe that it's true. So with my clients, everyone does functional stool testing and functional hormone testing. And I've worked with several different labs. My two favorite right now, I love the Dutch from Precision Analytical. Dutch is actually an acronym. It stands for Dried Urine Test for Comprehensive Hormones. That is by far the most comprehensive hormone lab I've ever seen. And I use it with every client, female and male, no matter the stage of life, because we all have these hormones and it's really important to know what everything looks like. So, with that particular lab, I mean, I've looked at hundreds of Dutch labs. Um, it's something that I probably do the most clinical advising sessions on just because it is a more complex lab. So I look at several a week. But we look at things like the stress hormones, the sex hormones, and not just the levels, but how our body is actually utilizing these hormones. And with women, especially, something I'm extremely passionate about because I am over 50 years old and I am in menopause. It's extremely important that if any woman is considering any kind of bioidentical hormone therapy, you may see a licensed practitioner that can prescribe compounded bioidentical hormones, which is great. They're going to measure your levels, typically with blood, which is awesome. That's the gold standard. But only something like dried urine testing, like what's available with the Dutch, will show us how your body is utilizing those hormones. And to tie this in with especially what you do, Debbie, is I know that you specialize in osteoporosis and bone health, right? Well, one of the reasons that menopausal women develop osteoporosis more than like younger women is because of the loss of estrogen that occurs naturally with menopause. So, seeing what those levels are, seeing how our body is choosing to metabolize those hormones. And when I say that, I mean we can literally see, are we metabolizing down the most protective pathway, or how much is going down this dual pathway, which actually can be protective against osteoporosis, or how much is going down this really bad, Debbie knows I like the word hideous pathway, where, it can create issues with even potentially causing cancer. I just think every woman should have that information on her hormones, whether she's doing hormone therapy or not, no matter the age. It's just really important to know this information so that you know how to support your body best with diet, with exercise, with supplements, with everything. We can also get clues about liver detoxification, not just with our hormones, but liver detoxification in general. There are what we call organic acid tests included in the Dutch. This can give us clue about some of our nutrient status with like B vitamins or master antioxidant, glutathione, neurotransmitters, and some other things. So it's just a very comprehensive test to get an overall picture of what your stress levels look like, what are the hormone levels, how are you metabolizing them, what can we do to tweak things to make you feel better in your body. So, in case you can't tell, I really love the touch test.
You do, yeah. And for me, like some of the things that stand out there, because I do specialize in bone health, I love even the first page. So I like to look at their circadian rhythm, which we get.
Hmm.
We do a true capture of cortisol. So instead of doing a 1 moment cortisol capture where at 10
Right.
a.m. on Monday, this is where you were. We look at your output throughout the day. So this is going to give us what's going on with your balance internally with your hormones. So I
Hmm.
love that, the capture, the cortisol awakening response, right? The CAR pattern.
Right.
So
Right.
that, and then for me, because one of the big root causes of bone loss is inflammation.
Hmm.
And looking at that first page, looking at metabolized cortisol versus what is picked up in the saliva. So we get to actually see,
Right.
does your body utilize that cortisol or does it get taken away for some inflammatory process internally? So
Hmm.
I love that. I mean, you mentioned a
Yeah.
lot about the liver and the pathways of the liver and how we could then
Hmm.
bring in liver support. But yes,
Right.
estrogen is bone protective. And I
Hmm.
don't know about you, but as a menopausal female, I want my hormones, whatever I have left, to be the best they could be, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm going to try to support them and coach them up to be the best they could be because oh boy, they're just There's something so beautiful about estrogen.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I understand and appreciate not every woman is a candidate for hormone therapy. Not every woman necessarily wants it. That's fine. You have to do what aligns with you. I just happen to have a lot of clients who do hormone therapy. And again, they're seeing practitioners who look at their levels so they can guide their treatment strategy, but they're not looking at the rest of the information that we can get on the Dutch so that we know how it's being utilized and to make sure that if you're going to supplement with estrogen, that you're doing it sensibly and in a way that is protective for your body, because there are ways of influencing that if it's not so great. So, yeah, I love
Yeah.
everything about the Dutch.
We get inflammation, we get total hormones, we
Hmm.
get the daily pattern, we get
Hmm.
liver, we get some sulfation markers. So, out of the
Right,
three detoxification pathways of the liver, we get two of them on the Dutch, right? We get
right.
methylation, we get sulfation, we get
Hmm.
an oxidative stress marker. There's the
Right.
80H, right? 80H.
Yeah, 80HDG. Yeah.
80HDG. Yeah, we get that in there. And then there's a melatonin marker as well.
Yep, absolutely. And then that provides a nice little window into gut function. And I have to say, stool testing is my second most favorite test that I do with folks. A lot of folks don't like to talk about it or think about it because it just seems kind of But you can learn so much about what is going on with your overall health just by looking at what is going on inside your gut. And the lab that I use the most frequently, I believe, is the one that you use as well, Debbie, is called the GI map. And what's so cool about this test is that it is DNA based. A long time ago, when functional medicine labs were first created with stool testing, everything was based on microscopy. So that involved literally, tech folks sitting in a laboratory and looking at stool samples one slide after the other through a microscope. A lot of things can be missed that way, to be perfectly honest. There were certain ways of trying to enhance it with certain dyes and using certain lights, but especially when you're trying to look for teeny tiny microorganisms, it's really easy to miss with the human eye. So I love this new DNA-based stool testing because the samples are run through a machine. Yes, I know it's not the human element, but it's run through a machine. And DNA is extracted from various organisms, from bacteria, from viruses, a variety of things. It's just so much more accurate. In fact, the test for H. pylori, which is a pathogenic bacteria that is way more common than people believe, that lives primarily in our stomach, the gold standard way of testing for that is qPCR DNA based testing, and that's what the stool testing allows. So wonderful for picking that up.
Yeah, when I read what it's a quantitative PCR, which I hadn't really heard much about the word PCR. I didn't really think about that word PCR. And then, of course, during the pandemic, we all learned what PCR was, right? Because we're doing PCR
Exactly.
tests.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and it's the actual DNA, so it tells you how many species were shown
Hmm.
in 1 gram of stool. It looks at 1 gram of stool, and it says
Yep.
in this gram of stool, here's how many of this was found or this was found, and then
Yep.
there's acceptable limits,
Right.
and then that we yeah, I know. And then
Yeah,
we get
acceptable.
yeah, acceptable limits, and then they give us markers, whether you're
Mhm.
clinical in a clinical range, whether you're below detectable limits. So
Right.
let's talk about this lab because my
Hmm.
signature program of my years of running functional labs, my signature program, this is one of the biggies. And when I tell people if they are going to only choose one lab, this is the one we're going to choose, right? Because the
Hmm.
gut is the window. I mean, there's so much that goes on the gut for hormones,
Right.
for bone health, for so many aspects. So let's discuss the GI map and let's talk about what are some of the great things we find here and
Mhm.
then what are some of those healing opportunities that it reveals for us for our clients.
Okay, awesome. The first page is something that's directed more towards pathogenic bacteria, viruses, and parasites. And it's on the first page because those are the things that can be more concerning for our health if something is detected. And just to say a couple of things that I see the most frequently on that first page, I see a parasite called Giardia. And especially in the spring and summer months, and sometimes early fall, we see it more frequently because this is something that a lot of people get from fresh water. So people who spend time in the ocean or lakes, whatever, well, oceans are salt water, but just water, bodies of water in general, we see that a lot more. So that's kind of interesting. And it's something that you want to know if you have. And then, believe it or not, I think a lot of people hear about C. diff, which is an acute infection that people can get. Well, the two most common reasons that people get C. diff is because of either hospitalization, which is sad but true, or having to take antibiotics. Well, a lot of people have to take antibiotics for various things. But if you have this particular bacteria present in your GI tract, taking antibiotics makes you more prevalent to develop an acute infection. So we can actually catch it in an earlier stage before someone develops an acute infection by simply testing for the presence of these toxins. So that's just one example of something. There are a lot of others that are related to foodborne illness, food poisoning, things like that. So we look at those kind of things like on the first page, and then we test for things like the H. pylori bacteria that I mentioned. And I can tell you, I mean, I probably look at 10 to 20 GI maps a week, the stool testing because of being clinical advisor. And I see H. pylori in like 90%.
Wow.
90% of stool tests. And, currently statistics say that probably 60% of the population has it. And I'm saying 90% of the ones that I see actually are present for that. And one of the reasons it's a good idea to know if you have that, something else, because this is DNA based, it also tests for something called virulence factors, which tells us just how bad of a species of H. pylori is this. Because, like any bacteria, there can be more than one type of this bacteria. And when someone has a virulence factor, they're more prone to develop stomach ulcers, duodenal ulcers, and even potentially stomach cancer. So it's really valuable information to know. So I love the fact that this test just includes that automatically and then breaks it down so efficiently that way.
Yeah, I don't know that I see it in 90%, but I see it in a lot. And clinical
Hmm.
studies or show that 25% of the women with osteoporosis have H. pylori. In my experience running GI map on a lot of women, I see more than 25% for sure. And the thing
Yeah,
to note here is that it affects digestion. And
absolutely.
for building hormones, for building cells, for
Hmm.
building bones, for building muscles, you need to have the nutrients or the building blocks. So we need our stomach to be able to digest the food into the amino acids so that the body can absorb them as building blocks. And H. pylori is going to have an effect
Yep.
on that. And also, I interviewed a pharmacist, and she explained to me that the pH of the stomach emptying into the small intestines, that you have to have this certain pH in the small intestines so that the bile will secrete into the intestines,
Right,
and so the pancreatic enzymes will release into the
right,
intestines. So it's not just is your food being broken down into the stomach, it's now the next place where most of the
right,
absorption takes place in small intestines.
right.
Is that, are you going to now allow the digestive processes to happen? So H.
Yeah,
pylori can be it's a really important thing to uncover. What are
absolutely.
some of the symptoms? What are some symptoms that that people, if they haven't ran a
Yeah.
stool test yet and they were thinking
Hmm.
like, oh, I've got to get to the bottom of this. What are some of the symptoms of H. pylori?
The most common, are the typical heartburn, acid reflux, indigestion, burping, bloating. So, a lot of what people just refer to as acid reflux or indigestion. Now, think of how many people you know, or if you're listening to this, you may have those symptoms yourself and think, I just thought that was normal. You may have had these symptoms for a long time and that becomes your normal, but that doesn't mean that it is normal. So, yeah, those are really the most common symptoms, and it's surprising to me how many people actually have those symptoms and just have no clue that that's why they have them.
Yeah, and they don't. So I was working with a woman recently, and I started working with her in the summer, and she didn't really mention digestive issues. That's not really a lot of what we were working on. It wasn't some of her main
Hmm.
complaints. So 4 months into her protocol, I'm checking in. How you doing? She said, I have no more digestive issues. And I said, wait a minute, you didn't really mention digestive issues. And that was like
Yeah.
her biggest aha. So sometimes
Hmm.
people actually don't realize that they shouldn't be feeling
Absolutely.
like that, that it's not normal to
Hmm.
have that. The other one is the lump, like you feel like you have like a lump,
Right.
right? That you're just like, whether it burns or not, it's almost like something
Hmm.
you can almost feel that your stomach is not properly digesting once you realize like,
Yeah.
oh, that's what's happening.
Yep,
So,
absolutely. And then think of all the people who take over the counter acid reducers like Tums and things like that. And then, I don't know about your population, but I see a lot of folks who, when they complain of these kind of digestive symptoms, the first thing typically that will be prescribed in medicine is an acid reducer like PPIs, proton pump inhibitors. Well, when you reduce the stomach acid, you're also impairing digestion and you're also giving H. pylori a chance to kind of flourish. So there's just so many things there. And I guess that's probably why I see it in like 90% of the labs that I look at. Keep in mind, I'm looking at people who are coming to people like us because they're not feeling well. So I'm sure that's why I just see it so frequently. But in addition to like those pathogenic type bacteria, the GI map also shows us what the microbiome looks like. And I know a lot of people are hearing more and more about that and the importance of this. Our gut is being referred to as the third brain, and our microbiome is the reason for that. We have good and bad bacteria. And there's some bacteria that's good until it gets to a certain level, and then it becomes opportunistic. And when it's overgrown, then suddenly it's a bad guy. So I love the fact that we can look at the overall levels of some of the most beneficial flora, the ones that help protect our health, especially our mucosal barrier, our gut health, our entire digestive tract. But we also can look at some of those bad guys, the ones that are opportunistic, that when they're overgrown, we can get other clues about why is this overgrown? What else is going on? We always, always, always correlate with our clients' symptoms and what are their main health complaints. I think it's really important that we don't get too much in the weeds, in my opinion, Debbie. Hopefully you feel this way with looking at like when we look at bacteria, focusing too much on each individual one, but I like to look at the big picture because this is one sample from one day. So that's why I like to take this information, but always correlate it with what's going on with my client. What is it that they're experiencing to kind of look at the big picture? In addition to all those microbiome bacteria, of course, candida, a lot of women have heard of candida, yeast, a lot of women, especially as we age, we start to experience some more of those symptoms as well, even like vaginal yeast infections, things like that. I tell women if you're experiencing a lot of vaginal yeast infections or you're getting a lot of UTIs, that's almost a surefire sign that there's an overgrowth of this candida yeast systemically.
yeah, or itchy ears, itchy skin, and then
Mhm.
also cravings, like cravings for sugar,
Sugar,
cravings for things that are like sugar, like
right?
pastries or something.
Starchy
And
carbs.
so I tell my clients, I'm like, it's not you, it's the yeast. And
Exactly.
I know for myself in my late 30s, I had chronic sinus infections and I was on antibiotics. Like every 3 weeks, I was on a round of antibiotics, which is so
Oh,
crazy now that I did that,
woo.
but I did because it was before I knew better or
Right.
before I had the information I have now. And so I gave up sugar, I gave up wine because that's what I was told. But what I used to do in order to give up the sugar and in order to give up the wine is I would visualize that the yeast was like these little black bugs inside of me and that it was
Okay.
them. So when I would have the craving, I would think they're craving it. And so it just put it into a perspective for me where I would say, I'm not going to feed them. I'm not going to feed
Right.
them. I thought of them like as
Right.
ants, like little
Hmm.
ants. That's what I would visualize.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that was one of the ways that I helped myself
Mhm.
remove the feeders of yeast. Like if you try to take away their food source. And so
Right.
then, in yeast, we need yeast, right? Yeast is in the
Hmm.
mucous membranes from mouth to vagina. And
Right.
so we need a certain balance. Everything is about balance and having the right balance.
Exactly. Exactly. It's not just about going after all the things because not all the things are bad if kept in check. It is about balance. You're absolutely right. Um, to quickly wrap up, if I can do that quickly, what's included on the GI map, in addition to what we've already talked about, we also look at some of the less pathogenic but still troublesome parasites. And one in particular, Indolamax nana, is one that can show up. That one can be responsible for leaching calcium out of the bones and helping to cause osteoporosis or osteopenia.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
always good to check for that one.
And then, okay, so then let's go down to the bottom because the intestinal and digestive markers that we get, that's a
Hmm.
really wonderful section. And I think some of the practitioners actually go to the bottom of the GI map first to look at that to kind of see what's going on at the start line to see what's
Hmm.
either coming into the system or what's not coming into the system that could then potentially create the
Yep.
havoc in the system. So let's talk a little
Yeah.
bit about that section.
Okay. Yeah, so there's digestion capacity. We look at something called steatocrit in elastase 1, which is really measuring how much undigested fat is in the stool, which can point to potential gallbladder issues, bile flow. And elastase 1 measures pancreatic enzymes. So, are we producing enough pancreatic enzymes to properly break down food? Because even if you're eating the most stellar diet, if you're taking great supplements, but you cannot digest or absorb these things, they're not doing you a whole lot of good. We can also get clues about the level of stomach acid from looking at pancreatic enzymes. So we tie some of these things together as we're looking at them. Also, we test something called B-glucuronidase, which is an enzyme that gets created by gut bacteria. When it's elevated, that gives us a clue on another phase 2 liver detoxification pathway called glucuronidation. And that one in particular can tie in with things like estrogen dominance, even in perimenopausal and postmenopausal women, believe it or not. So that gives us some great clues about how is that liver pathway working? Are we recirculating toxins in our body instead of eliminating them? We also check for the presence of blood, obviously, in the stool and a few other markers that are more related to inflammation. So there's secretory IgA, which is our primary immune system antibody. 75% of our SIG-A is what it's referred to, the short name, is actually produced in the gut because that really is our first line of defense. So if we have too many gut pathogens or really significant dysbiosis, it's going to use up our resources, if you will. And then that can make us susceptible to having just poor overall immune system function and be more susceptible to catching all the little bugs that go around. But other things can influence that as well, like someone who has a lot of stress in their life. If they have elevated cortisol levels, the stress hormone, that can also suppress secretory IgA. So that's how stress and gut also work together there. There's an anti-gliadin IgA marker, which is kind of uh, a screening marker for potential gluten sensitivity, which I think is really important. There are inflammation markers. There's one called eosinophil activation protein, which is more related to things like parasites, food allergies, inflammatory bowel disease, and another one called calprotectin, which is probably the most studied inflammation marker of the gut. And it's what doctors will use to evaluate when someone comes to them with symptoms. Is this IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, which is just a diagnosis that says we don't really know what's wrong with you? Or could it potentially be something more serious like an inflammatory bowel disease, like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, or even polyps, or absolute worst case scenario, something like cancer? So all of this is tested on that one stool test. I mean, that's a lot, Debbie, I
It,
think.
it it is. And so what does that mean? What does that mean for a woman that is either has osteoporosis, a woman that is in menopause, as aging goddesses that we are? What does that mean? Like that's, the gut is so important. So what is it that we
Hmm.
get from that? That's really kind of why we do this, is because we want to protect our bones and our
Right.
hormones. So
Hmm.
just a little bit about what it means if all of this is off in terms of hormone production in the gut and bone protection and nutrient absorption and all that. So could you just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, just very, very briefly, it's pointing to all of the metabolic and biological chaos that's going on inside of our bodies. It's really providing healing opportunities. I'm not a doctor. I know you're not a doctor. I don't diagnose people with things by running these labs. What I'm doing is pointing out all the imbalances, whether it's with the hormones, whether it's with what we see with liver function or what we see in gut function, whether it's the microbiome or pathogens or just all of these inflammation markers. These are healing opportunities. These are the things that we need to do to feel better in our bodies. And many times, I know you've probably experienced this too, when people come to you because they're concerned about osteoporosis, or people come to me about, oh, my hormones are a mess, and I talk about stool testing. They're like, why? It's, all of these tests that we do, you want to look at the big picture and look at as many areas of healing opportunity as possible. And since I do believe all disease begins in the gut, and again, hormones drive everything in the body, you need to work on those two things together, in my opinion, to restore balance in the body. Does that answer the question?
Yes, and now the research is calling this estrogen aspect of the gut the endobolome. And now
Yeah.
there's a lot more research on estrogen in the gut. And so, we're learning so much more about the gut, it seems, in these days.
Mhm.
In the early 2000s, when I would say leaky gut, people would be like, ha ha ha, leaky gut, right?
Yeah.
But now it's actually more common. So
Mhm.
it's really important for me with with bone health. 7 root causes: inflammation, stress, mineral deficiencies, hormone imbalances, toxicity, acidity, and being sedentary. But so much of that is in
Mhm.
the gut. So much of it
Right.
can go back to there. And I always say that the gut is when the outside world becomes the inside world. It's when,
Oh, yeah.
it's a closed system, right? From mouth to anus.
Mhm.
It's a closed system.
Mhm.
And so we
It
bring things
is.
in this tube. It's a tube. We bring things in this tube to come into our body, and
Mhm.
we need to digest it into the form that we need to absorb it. We have our fortress. Our fortress is our mucosal barrier. And on the
Mhm.
other side of the fortress is our protection. That's why 80% of the gut immune system is there. And
Right.
that's where that protection is. And so we need to
Mhm.
make sure that what comes in gets broken down. It passes by in the gate. The doors are opening, not
Mhm.
through leaky areas.
Right.
And so I always say it's about your fortress. It's about
Mhm.
that, making sure whatever's outside stays outside until it's invited inside and
Right.
accepted inside. So yeah, it's I mean, I don't know how people I work with women all the time with this, and you too with the hormones. I mean, really up
Mhm.
until they come to us and go through this functional testing, it's like a whack-a-mole, or a
Yes.
grasping for straws, where
Mhm.
and I don't know if you notice this, Paula. Do you get a lot of women coming to you on a whole slew of supplements? Like you get a list of all these supplements they're taking, just trying so
Yes.
hard.
Mhm. Yes, and that is the guessing instead of testing and really having a plan. But I understand the confusion too. There's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of noise in social media. There are a lot of people that are influencers. That doesn't necessarily make them experts. So it's really important who you listen to and who you follow and who you trust, because not everyone necessarily has your best interest in mind. If they're just trying to sell a particular supplement line or something, I don't know. That's not necessarily who you want to listen to. But yes, I have experienced that. Even when I was working in the medical practice, I would have people bring in shopping bags and dump it on my desk and say, okay, what do I need? What do I not need? And that was just very overwhelming. I couldn't even believe people would take that many supplements in a day. But yeah, even now, I only meet with women virtually. But when I see the list of supplements, I'm like, ooh, okay, that's a lot.
That's a lot, and your liver and kidneys have to manage that. A-
Absolutely.
and you have to digest it and you have to absorb it. And one of the markers that we find on the GI map, if we find a high steatocrit, which they're not metabolizing fat well, then the vitamin
Right.
K, E, A, and D
Hmm.
are maybe not even being fully digested.
Yep.
So then you end up peeing or pooping out
Yep.
your supplements.
All those expensive supplements. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
So yes. So, okay, Paula, because I think you're so wonderful and I know you help so many ladies. So, if women want to find you, how can they find you?
Well, Debbie, I have a website, paulareedwellness.com. I'm on Facebook and Instagram under Paula Reed Wellness. um, that's how they can find me if they want to
Yeah.
chat.
Okay, that's great.
I will also mention, as I think you mentioned my bio at the beginning, I do have a partnership with a very good friend and colleague, and she's a fellow clinical advisor, Whitney Morgan of Whitney Morgan Nutrition. We created something called the Functional Health Alliance, which is a free space right now that women can come to if maybe you don't have the funds or perhaps the motivation to do one-on-one work right now with someone, and you just want to hear from people that are not just influencers, but we are actually experts in this area. You can join us there as well. We're currently on Mighty Networks. March 1st, we're going to be transitioning to Facebook. So if you search for Functional Health Alliance, you'll find us on Facebook after March 1st, just so you know.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, because, well, I think that's awesome that you guys are doing that as well, because both you and Whitney really have helped a lot of women, really know a lot. So for you to be offering this service, and I've actually joined a couple of times as well, and you really share some valuable information there.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, I mean, that's, for me, Paula, this podcast, I call it Stronger Bones Lifestyle because I focus on bone health because that's my story and my journey and the women that I work with. But really what my goal is to first of all, kind of comb through all of the information overload, bring some
Mm-hmm.
clarity, bring some information for those of us that do this, that run functional labs, that have tremendous success with women actually finding that balance internally,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's hormones or bone health, but really to show women what is possible and what
Right.
does exist for them. That's my real goal, is what is possible for balancing hormones, for taking charge or control of your bone health. And so that's why I wanted to have you on, because I really respect you. I think you're fantastic. I love
Oh,
the
thank you.
information you share, and I wanted ladies to get this information. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank
And
you for having me, Debbie. I really appreciate you, and I'm glad that you're doing this podcast and getting the word out. And you're an expert as well, so being able to guide women the correct way is awesome. So thank you for doing this.
oh, thanks. Yeah, that's what it is. I mean, we're on this path. You and I have our stories. We came here. We're doing the best
Mhm.
we can do to age as healthy and strong as possible. And we want to help
Absolutely.
other women do that as well.
That's right. Awesome.
All right. Thank you so much, Paula. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you so much for listening to Stronger Bones Lifestyle Podcast. Bone loss is not an inevitable part of aging. We don't have to just wait for it to happen. There is so much that you can do. And that is what you will learn each week on the show. Go to my website, debbierobinson.com, if you want more information about what was shared in today's episode. At the bottom of this episode in the show notes, there will be links to whatever was shared. Please subscribe to this podcast. Share this podcast with your friends, your family, or any women that you think may be interested or benefit from the information we're sharing. Please rate the podcast. And if you have any questions you'd like asked or answered, I would love to hear from you. Let's do this, ladies. Let's change the way the world views osteoporosis and slow down, stop, or reverse our bone loss, take charge, and show other ladies what is possible. Thank you so much for joining me.